Hello, everyone. So today, first of all, Group A and C. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, say something, make some noise.
We can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So today we are going to start chapter 2. Now, last time we finished chapter 1, so chapter 1's homework is now available. You have 1 week to finish it now. The deadline is posted. Today we're going to try to probably do like most of chapter 2 so that on next week we can start chapter 3 and talk about trade. Now, in chapter 1, we talked about the basic principles and the fundamental agreements that economics is built upon. In this chapter, we're going to talk about economists. What I would like to see myself as one, but sometimes I don't feel I'm quite there. What my professors do, that would be a more accurate statement. Now, economists play two roles. Scientists try to explain the world. They try to say, for example, what happened after a government policy was implemented. One very good example is, let's see, where is it? Here. For example, this paper was about the actual effects of the bailouts in 2008 on job creation. The idea was in 2008 that the economy is in serious trouble and the government needs to pay money from his pocket to different sectors of the economy so that people can have some money and then start investing, start buying, and start employing other people so that the economy can get back on track. After this happened, some economists, they started to study, okay, did this actually help? And they found that, for example, in some sectors, the effects was much bigger, but in some sectors, like for example, in transportation, the effects were huge. They created a lot of jobs, but in education, for example, the effects wasn't that big. Contrary to the popular belief that says that if you invest in education, you're immediately going to get a really high uh, return. This actually didn't materialize. This didn't happen. This is the job of a scientist. Scientist looks at situation and tries to explain it. Something happened. Was it actually helpful? How much it was helpful? For example, for every single dollar that was invested in the bailout program, how many jobs were created? This is the like more than half of economics. The other half is when an economist uses those observations by scientists and tries to draw conclusions, tries to advise policymakers that, okay, guys, because of this, because in 2008, you put this much money in the bailout, you got this much return here, this much return here. Now that we're in a similar situation, you need to do this. You need to do this. You need to invest money in this area. You need to invest money in that area. And there are some differences. One very good example is this paper by Stiglitz. It's a very famous left wing, like I wouldn't say like he wouldn't call himself a left wing, but I'll call him like a more like a progressive economist. He wrote this paper, and this is pure advice, policy recommendation. He says that the government needs to take 4 steps to counter the COVID crisis. A couple of these steps are exactly like the 2008, but there are some major differences. For example, in 2008, people just didn't have money to go spend. But now, even if I am paid like $1 million, I'm still not going to go to a bar. It's not safe for me. If the area that I'm living in is like a COVID hotspot, I won't go to the bar, even if you pay me. So demand is not only about money here, it's also about the risk of getting COVID. So this is a different situation. And he argued that in order to do this, we need to first emphasize on getting rid of the COVID. That should be the first priority, in his words. So this is policy recommendation. And in order to build this recommendation, he relied on observations by scientists. For example, this observation here. This is like pure observation, pure data. This is, for example, this shows how much people change their spending patterns, their economic behaviors. For example, in California, you can see that this is the consumer spending. Let's see the consumer spending. For example, in California, you can see that low-income population, for example, their spending was decreased by, let's say, wow, this is scary. This is a very good Halloween decoration for me. It's like 40% just before the COVID relief packages arrived. And like when we're talking about 40% reduction in low-income population, this is scary because low-income population, it's not like, okay, we're not going to Ibiza this year. This means like less food on the table. So it's actually scary. And then you can compare this, for example, with other states like, let's see, Oklahoma. But then there are differences between the states. So every state is not the same in terms of COVID spread. Based on these observations and these data here, Stiglitz, he argued that first priority, get rid of COVID, then fund the states and local governments because they're the ones who cause the most unemployment crisis after financial crisis happens. The state and local governments, they have to reduce their budgets a lot, and it causes a lot of unemployment, and so on and so on. So this is the job of the policy advisors. These folks are usually like employed by government sector. For example, some of our professors, I know one of them, he actually worked with the Obama administration on taking British Petroleum to court after the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Or they work for the private industry. For example, one of my professors worked and advised the private company, a private agricultural insurance company, to advise them on the effects of climate change on agricultural insurance and the risk premium and so on and so on. So these are the two main jobs of economists. As scientists, economists employ the scientific method. The scientific method is basically just to test things. The best way to explain scientific method for me is to use this example. In the 20th century, the very famous discussion was the prediction by Karl Marx. Marx said as time goes forward, wages will constantly decrease because of population growth. There are more workers and more workers and more workers. And the rich will get richer because there's more production and production and production. The poor will get poorer, the rich will get richer. These two will get so much separated at one point, it won't be it would be unbearable. So the poor will revolt and there will be a workers' revolution, and then it will lead to the workers seizing the means of production and a communist revolution and a communist system being in place. And this will happen. No matter what you do, this will be the future. To answer to this, there was another, well, Karl Marx was German and his name was Karl. There was another Karl Popper in Austria, a philosopher and I think he was also an economist. He said, this prediction is not scientific. Why? Because you can't prove him wrong. In order to be scientific, you must be within a limit. For example, Karl Marx said this will happen. But when? Next year? 10 years from now? 50 years from now? When? So when this doesn't happen, I can tell you that you were wrong. A prediction and a statement needs to be rejectable in order to be scientific. There must be a mean for me, there must be some way for me to be able to reject you. For example, I'll tell you, like I always tell like my wife, I'll do the dishes tomorrow. That's scientific because when I don't do it tomorrow, she'll tell me, you didn't do it, so you have to do it eventually. But when I used to say, like a few years ago, I used to say, I'll do it later. That wasn't scientific because I wouldn't do it tomorrow. I wouldn't do it the day after tomorrow. So, but now I have to have like a set deadline to do it. That's the scientific method. Assumptions simplify the complex world and make it easier to understand. In order to be able to solve like these very complicated situations, we're talking about people. Economy is people. It's complicated. There are like millions and billions and infinite variables affecting each other. Will I go to the restaurant? Yes, you can look at my budget. You can see that I like to eat out. You can predict that. But what if this morning I just don't feel like it? I just like to go and sit by the lake and just watch the ducks. You can't predict that. So in order to be able to study these complex situations, to be able to work with people, the most complex organisms on Earth, us, we need to simplify the situation. We need to assume that people are predictable. They behave like this, they behave like that. And this usually causes a loss of precision. That's the word, precision. We become like, our models will become somewhat misleading, but at least they'll be close to the reality. For example, after the COVID crisis, everyone was saying that all the models were wrong. We were predicting like much more devastation and heavier casualties. It didn't happen. The reason it didn't happen was because the models were very simple. At that point, everybody was scrambling. We were shocked. Everyone was shocked. The governments were preparing. And as a scientist, you need to prepare for the worst. So when the worst arrives, if the worst arrives, like the human species won't end. That was the crisis that like last year started. So these scientists and these models, they usually missed a term in economics. You don't need to worry about learning that. It's called endogenous technological change. It basically means they failed to understand that we are smart. When they were building their models, they failed to understand that as a person, when I hear that my aunt got COVID, when I hear that my friends' grandparents died of COVID, I'll be more careful. I'll take care. I won't go places that I was supposed to go before COVID. I won't just go around and shake people's hands like I used to. I would put on a mask, even if the government doesn't mandate it. I'll be more careful. I'm smart. I can take my own decisions. Because of, it's almost impossible to predict this, like how smart. You can never predict it. Okay, I care, But sometimes I just don't care. Like sometimes I'm tired of this. I just want to take this mask away off and throw it away and just run wild maskless into the open. I need to breathe. The scientists can predict that because I'm a very complicated organism. I have lots of stuff going on my mind. No one can predict that. So, in order to go around this problem, we simplify the situation. One joke that can show this example. Three economists, they go hiking. They fall into a ditch. They're dying. They have no way to go out. They're starving. So one of them assumes there is a ladder. They all climb the ladder. They're safe. That's the assumption. It will help you get out of your problems. Your model doesn't work, you assume something that makes it work. To simplify it. To study international trade, we assume that there are only two countries and two goods. This is a very clear example. Now, economists use models to study economic issues. Models, lots of jokes in this area as well. I will spare you from them. They're highly simplified representation of a more complicated reality. A model, for example, a map. All of us use these Google Map and like other tools to navigate around. For example, I'm traveling to Atlanta or Florida. I will use a map when I'm driving. Where is my exit? Where should I merge into this highway and do that? Where should I get gas? The map is a highly simplified version of the reality of the world. The map doesn't tell me if there is like a deer crossing the road on this part. I don't need to know that. It just tells me where are the gas stations, where is my exit, how is the traffic, or probably is there a police car, like a patrol car, so I should like slow down a bit. All of these, they're highly simplified representations of a more complicated reality. The map on your phone is the perfect example for a model. Examples of models. The Model T's at the dentist's office, a model of human anatomy from high school biology class, and of course, a roadmap. Now, circular flow diagram. Circular flow diagram is a very basic model to teach students the complex reality of economics, how everybody is connected to each other in economics. Let's say a professor in Japan has a car accident this morning, a fender bender, and he calls his insurance company. His insurance company has to pay. Their profits would go down. Here in the United States, I am affected. The economy, again, is people. We're all connected to each other. We use the circular flow diagram to demonstrate this. Visual model of the economy shows how dollars, I don't like this word, how value, that's a better word, how value flows through markets among households and firms. Two decision makers. These are the two basic decision makers. Firms and households. Again, highly simplified. We say every employer is a firm. They're just the same, but they're not. There is a huge difference between agriculture and industry and like production of goods and service sector. They're not like any similar, like there are huge differences. There are huge differences. But in order to be able to study, we highly simplify this. And households, we put everyone, every single person here. If you are living as a group of people and have a single budget, for example, I used to live with my parents. My household in like 20 years ago was me, my sister, my mom, my dad, our household. Then I moved out. Then my household became me and a bunch of my roommates, and like we put all our money together. That was the like my early 20s. That was my household. Then I got married. So now my household involves me and my wife. Again, the two of us are one economic unit because we have the same budget. Even though most of us we work in different areas, we have different incomes, we have different interests and different like consumption behavior, but because we have the same budget, highly simplified, one household. Now, all these households, again, me and my wife, completely different from my parents, completely different from my friends and their wives and husbands, but highly simplified into one group of households. Interaction in two markets, market for goods and services, or in this case, market for goods and services. I'm really interested in this market. Market for factors of production and inputs. Now, we have the households. Households, they own the means of production, the factors of production. They would sell or rent them to companies, to firms. Firms do not exist as individuals. Firms are owned by individuals. For example, NC State doesn't exist as an individual with the thinking and with interests and behavior. NC State is just a tool owned by certain individuals. In this case, could be the government or private owners. Depends. For example, Tesla is owned mainly by Elon Musk, for example. Tesla doesn't exist. Elon Musk exists. Owns the factors of production. Then they would sell it or rent it to firms for income. Factors of production, inputs. These inputs could be the ownership of the firm, could be the land, could be the machinery. For example, I could decide to rent my car to this like insurance company to act as an advertiser, like somebody would drive it around and like put signs on it. I could decide to rent my truck to this farmer living next door, so he can like take it and like go take his tractors like equipment to the mechanic, do something with it. I own the factors of production, the inputs. I rent them to people, to firms for production. And then I would use the fruits of that renting and selling factors to buy and consume what came out of those production of like operations, to buy and consume goods and services. For example, I rent my truck to the farmer living next door. His tractor broke down. He needs to take the radiator out, take it to the mechanic, get it fixed. I rent my truck to him for, let's say, $50. And then he'll go take care of it. There's a harvest season. He'll get his corn. I'll pay him the $50 to buy corn. This is like the highly simplified version of this trade. Firms, on the other hand, companies, they would buy and hire factors of production. Factors of production, inputs. The most important and often neglected factor of production, us, labor. You go to work. Thankfully, they're not buying, they're renting our labor. They rent your labor. NC State is renting my labor right now from 1:30 to 245, my time, my skills. They wouldn't hire anybody from like the street. Come here and teach macroeconomics. And my experience, all of that. It's rented. So from 1:30 to 2:45, I have a contract. I have to teach this class. My labor is rented. In exchange, I'm getting paid by the company. And then this is a very good example because then I use my pay indirectly to pay tuition to NC State so I can get my PhD. You see how we're connected to each other? It's a circle. I teach macroeconomics, I get paid, I pay NC State, I get education. Goes around. A more complex version of this happens in every sector of the economy. You work for Amazon, Amazon pays you, and then you buy stuff online from Amazon. That's the simple situation. Revenue, markets for goods and services. Okay, sorry about that. Now, we got the markets for goods and services and markets for factors of production, inputs. Let's say we start here. I wake up in the morning, I'm in the household. You could go either way. I spend money. I go buy gas for my car. There is a gas station market for gas and goods and services. The revenue goes back towards the company. Let's say I bought gas, I got gas at BP, to British Petroleum. Then the revenue, first of all, your costs must be deducted. BP needs to pay its employees, wages, rents, and everything. Then the profits would go back. There is a market for factors of production. There is a labor market. Some person would say, okay, I'm going to work for BP in exchange for this much income. The land that gas station is built upon is owned by somebody. So that person would say, I'm going to let you use my land to build a gas station in exchange for rent. Wages, rent, and profit. And these, all of them, they go back into households as income. So wages will go to BP employees, rent to people who own the lands that gas stations are built upon, or those who, for example, in Texas, if you have oil in your farm, you could rent it to these companies, and in exchange, you'll get a really good income. Rent would go to those who own factors of production and rent it to them, and profits would go to owners of the firm, to the stockholders, to those who bought the stocks of this company on the stock market, or who just own those who own the company. And this market for factors of production is the labor market. When people compete to work for BP, is the market for renting land and everything. These are the input market. It goes back into the household. Now, let's look at it from the other way. I wake up in the morning again. I have to go to work. Labor. I have my labor. And let's say I have some land. Let's say I have a house. I will rent it. And I have some capital. For example, I have, let's say, a capital, like I have 5 18-wheelers. I own 5 heavy trucks, 18-wheelers, trailer, tractors. I would also rent them to, let's say, a transportation company. These are my capital. There is a market for them. I would negotiate over the rent of my labor, how much I'm getting paid from NC State. I negotiate over it. Say, okay, this is not enough. You have to pay me more. Now I have to wear like 5 masks and like 2 masks. The other day they were saying like 1 mask. Now they're saying 2 masks. Tomorrow they may say 10 masks. So you got to pay me something. I'm losing my mind here. I negotiate. Of course, some of this could be made up just to negotiate a better, higher salary. And my boss would negotiate, but this is a bad situation. We don't have enough money. The school is like half online. Half of our operations are shut down. We don't have that kind of budget anymore. You have to work with us. We negotiate. I push for more salary. My boss would push for less salary. At one point, our forces are balanced. We say, all right, we can't shake hands, so we just bump our ankles and we sign a contract. That's the market for my labor. The same market exists for my capital, my land. We negotiate for rents. Then these factors of production are used by firms, in this example, NC State, to produce a service, education. People come here to get their degrees, to learn things, to get their diplomas, to get expertise, so they can then go on a different market and compete for labor at a higher salary. They can be engineers, they can be accountants, they can be like lawyers, all of it. So the education in terms of goods and services is sold at the market. Each one of you came here, you had other options. You could have applied for, let's say, UNC Chapel Hill, UNC Charlotte. You had different options around you. There was a market. Each option had certain benefits, certain costs. So you weighted like all the costs and benefits and picked the best option for you. That's the market for the final goods. And then in terms of bought goods and services, which is hopefully going to be my PhD, comes back into my household. So you see, everything is connected here. That's why we have this current situation with the lockdowns. You have, for example, let's see, we saw California, let's see Florida. You have reduction in spending. Why? Because you also have a reduction in small business revenues. You see, all of this, it first like went up a little bit, that this is the part when people were buying all the toilet paper, then it crashed. It almost crashed to 50% before the relief packages and then the easing of the lockdowns. It's still, this is December like 28th, is still a third of what it was last year. So it's a bad thing. And all of these are connected to each other. A small business revenue and job posting. There is less revenue, there are fewer jobs available. Let's say for required education, moderate and considerable. You see? Jobs are now, even though at this point the economy is recovering and companies have started to hire, still lower than what it was last year. Because there is no revenue, there is no employment. And all of this, because there is no employment, let's say middle income and high income. Because there is no employment, people don't have enough money to spend. All economies connected with each other. Production possibilities frontier. Now, this is a second tool that we use. The first tool, the circular flow diagram, is to show you how everything is connected in the economy. And then you can use this diagram to predict what happens when there is a reduction in small business revenues, what happens to job postings, what happens to spending. The second tool is the PPF. This is a very important. The first one is just to tell you a story of how the economy works. But this second one is very important, definitely on your midterm exam. Make sure you just know it. Different types of PPF, how to find the, how to work with it. We'll cover it in this chapter. Definitely on your exam. So that's like 20 points in your midterm. A graph, combinations of output that the economy can possibly produce, given the available factors of production and technology. You have some tools available, how much production you can get out of your tools. Factors of production technology. Example, there are two goods, computers and wheat. One resource, labor. Let's say we have two goods, only we can do like two jobs. There are only two jobs available. We could either farm or work at the computer factory. And we only have one input for that, one resource, our labor. Let's say me, plus I. I can work at a farm. Would be extremely hard for me, but still, farming is a very hard, it needs physical labor, and it also needs brains. And like I can do only one of them at a time. So like when I'm doing physical labor, my brain is off. When I'm doing brain stuff, my physical labor is impossible. So farming is very hard for me. But then you also have an opportunity at a computer factory. It's more about brains and less about physical force. So these are the two options available. I think the Greeks, they used to call farming the peak of human achievement. Like the perfect human is the farmer. He's both smart, he or she is both smart and physically strong, can carry stuff around, can work with tools, and also needs to know the market, needs to know the risks, the economy around the agriculture, inputs and outputs. So I really like that definition. Let's see. Employment of labor hours. Producing one computer requires 100 hours of labor. That's the unit for labor. We talk about hours of labor. For example, if you want to produce a computer, you need 100 hours, 10 hours to produce this part, 15 hours for this part, the rest for this part. In total, you need 100 hours to produce one unit of computer. Producing 1 ton of wheat here requires 10 hours of labor. You need to plant, you need to like fertilize the ground, you need to plant them, and you need to water your fields. And then you just, you can do something else until they grow and it's ready to be harvested. So only 10 hours. Now, I can either do only computers, I can devote all my resources to production of computers. Let's see, in total, I have 500 people, I have 500 workers. Each of them can work 10 hours. So in total, in this country, is 50,000 hours of labor. That's my total endowment, which is called in economics. My total resources, 50,000. If I put them all towards building computers, I'm going to get how many computers? $500. And how much wheat? 0. Yes. If I, let's say, okay, but we also need to eat. So I'm going to send a few people to the farms, 40,000 hours of labor producing computers, 10,000 hours producing wheat. Then 400 computers and 1,000 tons of wheat. If I say, okay, no more computers, only agriculture, I can say I can get no wheat and 5,000 tons of, no computers and 5,000 tons of wheat. We can draw the curve like this. Now, if you want to draw a PPF curve, is this to draw stuff on or is this sheer? Now, if I want to draw a curve, a PPF curve, first, like I have computers here, let's say C, and wheat here, W. First, I allocate all my resources towards one good. Computers, how many? All, if I send all the 50,000 hours of labor to computer, how many computers I'm going to get? 50,000 divided by 100? 500. Then I allocate all my resources to producing wheat. How much wheat I'm going to get? 5,000. There are other points in the middle. And because it's like the same costs at every point, you can say that it's a linear curve. So you don't really need those points. You just connect the two dots. This is your PPF curve, production, possibilities, frontier. This is how you draw a PPF curve. You can learn it here. It's very easy, and it's definitely going to be on your exam. Now, you have the slides, or really need, let's see what I can do. If we had another board, that would have been great. Thank you. Yes. Now, on this, sorry about that. All the way here. Can anyone see? Can everyone see? Perfect. Now, on this graph here, you have the PPF curve. Can you see the board now? can't see it. I was on the other side. All right, let me think. We're just going to use the computer as a board now. Now, on the graph above, the previous slide on this graph, just use the slides. Find the point that represents 100 computers and 3,000 tons of wheat. Let's call this F. 100 computers is this point here, and 3,000 tons of wheat. This is F. Do the same. Find a point that represents 300 computers and 3,500 tons of wheat. Call it G. Now, tell me, would it be possible for the economy to produce this combination of the two goods? Is it possible for me to produce point F, looking at my endowments, my resources? Can I produce 100 computers and 3,000 tons of wheat? Yes, it is. What about point G? Is it possible for me to produce 300 computers and 3,500 tons of wheat? No. Why not? Because it's more than what I have. I can never produce this many goods and with this much resources. It's like students. You always say at the beginning of the week, okay, I'm going to study. I have 2 homeworks due for next week, a midterm exam, so I'm going to study 2 hours every night, get it all under control. Then I don't study. Next day, say, okay, I'll study 3 hours every day and get it under control. I still won't do it. Up until Sunday. On Sunday, I say, okay, in 10 hours, I have 2 homeworks due and a midterm exam. I need to study 50 hours in 10 hours to get them all under control. Is it possible? No. So it's just above my endowment, the resources I have. I can never achieve that much output with that many, with those few resources. If you look at point F here, yes, I can. But then, should I be proud of myself if I'm at point F? Why? Why not? I was able to do it. Why shouldn't I be really happy? Go ahead. Yes, I can do better. I can do better. So I'm not efficient. This is possible, but not efficient. I shouldn't be proud of myself because I can do better. 100 computers, 3,000 tons of wheat requires 40,000 hours of labor. It's possible, but not efficient. I can get more of either goods without sacrificing any of the other. So I can be just better. Point G, 300 computers and 3,500 tons of wheat. It requires 65,000 hours of labor. I don't have that much. I only have 50,000. So it's not possible. Because the economy only has 50,000 hours. So it's not possible for me. The first year I came here, all my classmates, they're super smart, they're super hardworking, and at the end of our first year, we have this really scary exam. So like you study 1 year, and at the end of the first year, they take this really difficult and super scary exam. And if you fail that, that's it, bye-bye, go home. You need to pass it. And usually like a third of the class fails. So the first year, everybody is so stressed. Like we're all trying to study harder, push towards this point G here. And there was this one time I was talking with my classmates, like, yeah, I'm not being efficient. I'm not working too hard. And so one of them was like, yes, me too. Like last night, I slept 5 hours. I'm so lazy. And I'm like, 5 hours? You slept only 5 hours and you're mad at yourself? If I don't get 8 hours of sleep, you need to call 911 to get me out of the bed. That's it. For me, sleeping 5 hours is here. For some people, it's here, but I need my 8 hours of sleep. You can never go above your limited inputs. That's the case. You need to, as a rational person, you maximize your output using your available inputs. Points on the PPF, like A and E, are possible and efficient. That means you have utilized all your available resources to produce the maximum possible output. Points under the PPF, like F, it's possible, but you can do better. It's not efficient. Some resources are just underutilized, they're wasted. And points above the PPF, not possible. Now, remember the second principle of macroeconomics? We face trade-off. In order to have something, you need to give up something. You can't have everything. If I want more computers, I have to give up on wheat. If I want more food, I need to give up on computers. You can't have everything. Society faces a trade-off. You can't keep the economy functional and then get rid of COVID. You can't have lockdowns and not have unemployment. Everything comes at a price, and the price is what you're giving up. That's the issue, that's the problem. That's the reason we exist as economists. You can't protect the environment and just produce all the fossil fuel you can. You cannot stop producing fossil fuel and have an industry. Everything is a trade-off. If you want to produce fossil fuel, you have to sacrifice some of the environment. If you want to protect the environment, you have to sacrifice some of your fossil fuel production. Everything comes at a cost. Society faces a trade-off. Getting more of one good requires sacrificing some of the other. You want more computers, less wheat. You want more wheat, fewer computers. And this is beautiful. I love this. Honestly, I'm in love with this. This is how debates and theory meet mathematics. This is beautiful. The slope of the PPF curve, it represents that trade-off. The slope of a curve shows us how many units of y-axis change in exchange for one unit change in the x-axis. Here. In this case, the slope of the PPF curve, it shows that trade-off, that philosophical debate that you can't have everything, that by nature humankind is limited. And like all the drive towards efficiency throughout history, everything we've ever done was to get above this PPF curve, to reach that point G. There, I'm getting too, like, starting to sound like a mystic person at this point, but like the Egyptian pyramids, they were the representation, like human struggle to go above its limits, his limits, her limits, to reach point G. If I'm not mistaken, even Washington Monument is a symbol of that, the struggle to go above, to reach point G. And all of that can be seen here using mass. The trade-off you're facing as a limited person, you can't have everything. You give up 1 unit of X, or you want 1 more unit of X, which is 1 more computer. You want 1 more computer, that's good. That's all right, but you have to give up 10 tons of wheat. You're a limited person. You can't achieve point G. You're stuck with this PPF curve. 1 more computer, say bye-bye to 10 tons of wheat. Or the opposite. You want 10 more tons of wheat, you have to give up on 1 computer. The slope of a line equals the rise over the run. The changes in the y-axis, this vertical one, it's the rise. Over the run, the changes in the x-axis, the vertical. I said vertical for both. So the first one is vertical, the second one is horizontal. And this shows us the most important thing in economics, the most important thing for you to get from this class, the opportunity cost. Definitely a question on your midterm exam. This is definitely a question. Every year, every time I teach, this is probably going to be your first question. This is the most important question. Make sure you understand this. And because I'm telling you that this will be on your exam, obviously I'm going to be a little creative. So you have to really know this really good. I won't be taken prisoners about this. That's just opportunity cost of 1 computer, 10 tons of wheat. You have to give up on 10 tons of wheat to get 1 computer. That's your opportunity cost. We all face opportunity costs in our lives. What's the opportunity cost of coming to class? What did you give up to be here? Some of you are sleeping, so I would definitely say sleep. Free time. Yes, you could have done something else on your free time. You could have watched a movie or do your homework for your other class. You could do something else. That's the opportunity cost. You give up your time to be here, to, I'm hoping, to learn economics and not just get a take on your attendance sheet. So there are certain benefits for you in coming to class versus certain costs. Those costs are opportunity costs. You're giving up on things. In this case, 1 computer means giving up 10 tons of wheat. That's the opportunity cost. Tell me, before we move on, tell me the opportunity cost of, let's say, buying a car. What's the opportunity cost of buying a car? Yes. And the time you have to spend on the mechanics for for maintaining that car, or like taking it somewhere, like yearly inspections, taxes. This is very important when we're making personal financial decisions. You have to consider all the opportunity costs. The price of the good is always the main part. It's like 90%. But you have to consider the other 10% as well. Buying a house, very good. What's the opportunity cost of buying the house? The money you pay, the cost of maintaining the house, the time you have to spend like fixing all this stuff that if you were just renting an apartment, you could just call the maintenance guy and he'll take care of it. All of this are opportunity costs. The benefits of buying a house is the money that you don't have to pay as rent every month. You have now more allocated income, more disposable income, more income in your pocket. You have more money in your pocket. This is why all the research shows that buying a house for a household, for a normal middle class household or lower class household, buying a house or owning your own house is the first step towards accumulating wealth. If you own your house, in 20 years, you'll be much more successful on average again. On the other hand, because of the opportunity costs of buying a house, so many business owners, especially small business owners, they decide not to buy a house. They would sell their house, invest the money in their own business. They would just rent a place. Because they believe that they're so good at their business, they can make more money from the rent that they would have saved if they just bought the house. So, very important in your personal finances, the concept of opportunity cost. Coming to college, you're right now, your opportunity cost of coming to college, you're not working full time. You could have made a lot of money in these 4 years. But are you wasting your time here? No. Because after you graduate, you're going to find a better job, hopefully. And then you can enjoy a higher income. So throughout, like on a timeline, let's say in 10 years, you're going to start making a profit compared to your friend or your cousin who didn't go to college. This is what research shows. On average, if you go to college, your income will be much higher than those who didn't go to college. So college, opportunity cost. It's an investment. Let's look at a very simple example from the medieval times. In which country is the opportunity cost of cloth lower? Historically, this was the PPF curve for France, and this was the PPF curve for England. Which country had a lower opportunity cost for cloth? It means that they need that they could like produce the same amount of cloth by giving up less of the other good, which is wine here. Which country has that lower opportunity cost of cloth? England. Why? Yeah. The slope, it represents how much we're giving up. This is a less steeper curve. It's like more flat. That means if I want one more unit of cloth, I don't need to give up this much unit that like I would have had to in France. Here it's so steep. So if I want one more cloth, I have to give up this much wine. Here, only this much smaller. And this was the fact historically. England was very good at producing wool and cloth. And French, they were famous for what? Wine. French wine is still famous because their opportunity cost was lower when they wanted to produce wine. Yeah, if you look at the wine, the other side, you can see that French, they have the lower opportunity cost. This is why even today, French wine is world famous. You don't hear English wine because of their differences. They may have had the same number of workers, but their geography was different. Southern France, very good for producing wine and like Champagne. They even have like this whole part of France is called Champagne in the middle, I think. So this is the case. They could have produced more cloth, more wine by giving up fewer pieces of cloth. Economic growth and the PPF. Again, the drive towards that point G. This is what matters at the end. This is why people study economics. This is why people elect certain politicians. They all promise that point G. We are going to get it, make it possible to grow the economy. Economic growth shifts the PPF curve upward, outward. So you can have more of everything. It's still limited, but more. The constant drive towards more and more and more. With additional resources and improvements in technology, the economy can now produce more and more of each good. Now, the shape of the PPF curve, this is we have enough time for this. This is our last like part of discussion for today. A normal PPF curve is linear. No matter how many units of computer you're already producing, in order to produce one more unit of computers, you have to still give up 10 tons of wheat. That's the same, no matter where you are on the PPF curve. But in reality, this doesn't hold. Why? Because it's a very simple assumption. It's a very simple model. It assumes that all your 50,000 hours of labor is homogeneous. People are all the same. This assumes that all the people are like looking like dolls in a factory line. They're all the same. They have the same skills, the same educations, the same experiences. So they can only do the same thing. But it's not real. A more realistic study of the PPF curve is about outward. This is a more realistic definition of the PPF curve. Your labor force is not homogeneous. I am a much better teacher than I am, let's say, I would be a Marine, for example. I would be a terrible soldier, make my officer crazy. Seriously, I constantly complain, like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? In the tank, constantly. So I'm better in a different area. I'm not the same as, like, for example, I had a roommate in my first year here. He was a US Marine. He used to be a Marine. He was a veteran. He was like very bad at teaching economics, but good as his own job as a professional soldier. I was much better at economics, not that good of a professional soldier. So you have beer in this example and mountain bikes. At this point, let's say we're here. Every single person in the country is just brewing beers. Everyone. This includes professional brewers, famous brewers who have been doing this for generations in their breweries, and your mechanics and your engineers who don't know anything about brewing beer. So someone would say, you know what, all the beer we're drinking, it's not really good for our health. So we need to like a little exercise. So let's start producing mountain bikes as well. You start a mountain bike factory in your country as well. The first people you send from the brewery to the factory, who do you send first? Will you send the professional brewers who have been doing this for generations? Or will you send the mechanics and the more mechanical persons? Which one would you send first? The mechanics, the people who are more professional and better skilled at producing mountain bikes, and you save your brewers to keep producing beers. This is why at the beginning, your PPF curve is very flat. You're gaining a lot of mountain bikes while losing only a few kegs of beer. Why? Because you're keeping your best brewers and you're getting rid of all the horrible brewers who were actually good at producing mountain bikes. You're sending them to the factory. They're producing a lot of mountain bikes and you're only losing a few kegs of beer. But as you move forward and forward and forward, when you reach this point, now you have to send your professional brewers. You already sent everyone who was good at producing bikes to the mountain bike factory. Now you're only left with your best brewers. So this is why at this point, the slope of this curve is steep. For every single mountain bike that a professional brewer is producing, you're losing a lot of beer. This is the more realistic version. Now, on the exam, if I ask you to work with this, I will tell you it is not linear. So, because it's like much harder, you need to like know advanced optimization techniques. And I would usually not give you a question with this type of curve. I would stick to the linear one. And if I give you one of these, I will let you know that this is not linear, this is bowed outward, or I will tell you about the difference in the labor force. It's not homogeneous. Everyone is not the same. I will give you a hint. And I just need you to analyze it. I don't want to find me like a point or like something special here on this curve. And the opportunity cost of mountain bike increases as you give up on your brewers. Yep, at this point, the opportunity cost of mountain bikes is low. Then we move forward. Now, opportunity cost of mountain bike is high. Why the PPF might be bowed outward? Different workers have different sets of skills and different opportunity costs, geography, everything. There is some other resources or a mix of resources with varying opportunity costs. For example, different types of land suited for different uses. And let's end it here. Next time, we're going to just finish chapter 2. So like a few slides left. And then we'll go towards chapter 3. Thank you very much, everyone. Any questions? If you have any questions, I can stay here for a few more minutes and let's talk. Other than that, as Southerners say here, the best phrase, let me let you go. Have a nice weekend. Nicole, sorry, I didn't see your question. So using all your resources is possible and efficient. Yes. If you're using all your resources, you're using all your potential. So it's possible to do it. It's like if I sleep for 8 hours and study for like 13 or 14 hours and just spend 2 hours on eating lunch and things like that. That's my peak efficiency. It's possible for me and it's my peak efficiency. So I'm efficient at that point. Yeah, you're not efficiency. Okay, thank you. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. Just stop the